A crossover with those dirty Badgers. You're not going to want to miss this one, folks. We're going to duke it out right here on Locked On Golden Gophers.
Locked On Golden Gophers, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Golden Gophers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Golden Gophers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today, we are joined in doing a crossover with none other than Ryan, the host over at Locked On Badgers. It's time to duke it out. It's time to talk the rivalry. It's time to talk about those stinking odds that BetOnline put out that just gives us some disrespect across the Big Ten. But we're going to do all that and more today's episode. So thank you for following, subscribing. Be sure to find the Locked On Golden Gophers podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to subscribe on YouTube. Now let's jump in to this crossover pod. Welcome in to the first official crossover between the Gophers and Wisconsin. I'm Kane Rob, host of Locked On Golden Gophers.
I'm Ryan Haring, host of Locked On Badgers, and this is going to be the first of many, I think, coming up.
Absolutely. And hopefully I'll be able to have some bragging rights over you once again this year. But we'll see what happens with that. We're going to jump into this first segment, and we're just going to talk about the rivalry here. And is it something that's renewed? Let's look at the perspectives. I mean, how do you view this rivalry, Minnesota and Wisconsin, as a Badger fan? How do you see this rivalry overall?
Yeah, so low key as a father, I bought my kid a Rand McNally map, like a puzzle thing, and I took out the Minnesota piece. So for he was growing up actually thinking, because you can manipulate your children. And he grew up actually thinking for a while, he's past the stage, but that there was actually nothing there in America. Like it was a hole and a disaster had happened. So that kind of answers the question, what I think about the rivalry in the broad sense. Going to the football side, I think, this is still a rivalry that Wisconsin, obviously they won 14 in a row. The last 4, it's been 2-2. It's really started to split up a little bit. I still think Wisconsin in this rivalry is the better program and is likely going to continue, not 14 in a row, that's ridiculous, but continue winning at a higher clip than 50-50.
You had your 14 in a row. I knew it was going to come up. I knew that it was going to get slipped in there. I thought it might be more braggadocious if we're being honest with ourselves, but that's the past. And you know what we like to do about the past? We learn from it and we move on. I think this rivalry is absolutely renewed. And speaking of how I feel about Wisconsin, you brought up how your kid couldn't even have Minnesota on the map. Well, I went to school in Wisconsin. My undergrad, I went into Wisconsin. You know what? Every time we crossed that border back into Minnesota, when we'd come up visit for home or anything like that, we'd be like, you feel that? You feel that? I feel like I just had a weight lifted off my chest. This is absolutely the better state. So we're right there with you. I mean, overall, I think that since Fleck has joined this program, and I'm sure you knew I was going to bring up PJ Fleck,
for sure.
But since he joined our program, these games are competitive once again, and we're not that same old program, the pushover program. And I think that it is absolutely renewed. Now, I'm not going to go on and say that it's evened out. I think we still have to prove that. I think that we still have to go out and, especially this year, take a win. But I think we need to go win a Big Ten West in order to really step up and say we're right back up with Wisconsin. I think having a Big Ten West crown will allow us to start talking the trash again, but also putting ourselves in that conversation to be respected. I think we're right there on the verge of it, and we've been showing that. And so I think that this year is a major year. And not only is it major because of that, but if the Gophers win this year, which they will.
You talking about the division or the game?
The game.
Okay.
If the Gophers
in
win
Camp Randall,
the game,
by the way.
Yes, I know. If the Gophers win the game this year in Camp Randall, the overall series will be even. It's currently sits at 62, 61, and 8. So it's a huge storyline. And I also think that this year's game could likely determine who's going to that Big Ten championship. So lots on the line this year. And I am just amped for this game.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me with Fleck coming in and really kind of to your point, injecting life into that rivalry. However, I still think if you look at the two programs, the most consistent thing about any of them is Wisconsin's defense, right? In my opinion, it's really the bedrock of it might be the most consistent unit in the Big Ten West in general. And I think that's where Wisconsin still has a level of foundation built that Minnesota isn't there yet. And I don't know if you can get there in a year, in 5 years. I mean, they've really built this over the course of 10 years, that defensive foundation. So I think that's still where Minnesota, Tanner Morgan came in and he played really well. He's been inconsistent, but he provided above level, above average, certainly quarterback play in the Big Ten West. What's going to happen when he's gone? Right. Because that's the difference. Where Wisconsin has survived quarterback transitions because of that defense. I don't know what Minnesota's foundation is.
For sure. That makes sense. I think so far our foundation, at least in this time with Fleck, has actually been our run game and how that has just been so consistent across all of these years. But I know we want to get back to the passing. We want to get at least more of a balanced approach. We saw what happened with the Gophers in 2019, and now we're bringing that offensive coordinator back, hoping to kind of balance the scales. And that's been stressed all of this spring program. Now, if you ask the Gophers fans right now what happens when Tanner Morgan leaves, you're going to get probably about 75% of Gophers fans saying, please let him leave, because they're super excited not only for a new fresh face, but Ethan Kayakmanis is our backup right now. He earned the backup job in the spring program. 4-star kid. He's one of the highest recruits that we've had join the program in our time. And this spring program was actually fascinating to watch. He's got fantastic zip on the ball. He let it get away from him a little bit on the deep balls, but overall you saw excitement. You saw things that Tanner Morgan isn't able to do. And like, people are just, it's just like watching the teams in the NFL or the NBA or anything like that are dominant for a long time. And then you see people get sick of them and they want a new champion. They want a new contender and they want to get off of those bandwagons. That's how Gophers fans are feeling about Tanner Morgan pretty much here. Is we've seen him for 6 years and we want him gone. Like we don't need him anymore. So I think the bedrock has been our running game, but I think that ever since our defensive coordinator, Joe Rossi, has come to the program as well, our defense has really shifted into a great category. I think overall, we saw last year how we were top 3 in total defense, top 10 in rush defense, top 8 in pass defense. And we lost a lot of pieces, but even speaking with Coach Joe Rossi, or in our show I had with Ryan Burns this week, the defense is actually super intriguing. And although last year our front 7 was our strength, this year it looks like our D-backs and our back 7 is going to be the heavy strength. And so it's super exciting to at least see the defensive consistency starting to show itself.
Well, there's definitely been NFL guys coming off that Gophers roster on the defensive side that we haven't seen, previously to this regime. So there's certainly truth there. Bringing it back to the rivalry itself, you mentioned not just having to kind of beat Wisconsin, and whether it's this year or if you beat them again next year, but you also mentioned having to win the division at some point, right?
Right.
If you're going in the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, what is the timeline for PJ Fleck where he has to win a division title? Like, it's just not this year, but what if he doesn't win one in 3 years or 4 years?
Honestly, from my perspective, and I'm thinking from a lot of fans' perspective, it's hard to want to move away from Fleck, seeing the culture that he's built here, the absolute change that he's built here, and the presence. I mean, even the presence of fans at the game, it just feels different. It feels exciting, and there's just an attitude and a swagger about ourselves, even though it's not like the word swagger is an interesting word. It's not something you would think of with PJ Fleck, but it's that chip on the shoulder kind of attitude that he's revitalized the hope and the energy. And I feel like it would be very hard to push him out, even if he wasn't up winning a division. I think overall, as long as he is having a team that is in contention for that division, you're not going to see him leaving or being forced out, at least. If anything, I think him leaving would be more of a worry than us forcing him out.
Yeah, that makes sense. What's the risk factor there?
I think with that recent extension on top of it, just seems like he's really built in, and it feels like he's been able to build his own thing here. I mean, I don't know how many other places, especially taking the next step, like where do you go from here? You're in the Big Ten, which is one of the best conferences. most people would probably call it the second best conference. You and I, we'd go to bat and call it the best conference. But most people would, okay, the SEC maybe is above us. Well, even in the SEC, you're not going to want to go to a program that's a bottom feeder in the SEC. So you're only really looking at those top jobs. But are they going to offer you the same type of thing that Minnesota is, where you can build this thing exactly how you want to, brand it with your row the boat, and show us where to go? You know what I mean? So I think it would take a lot to pull them away. So, I mean, overall, we've kind of touched on, I believe the rivalry's there. We've both got a little perspective on if it's fully back, but we'll have more to talk about that this upcoming season. Now, as we are going to talk about this upcoming season, we're going to talk about the Big Ten West. And coming up next, we're going to talk about, does the Big Ten West get too much flack? And I think that our takes might catch you by surprise. But first, let's talk about our friends over at Built Bar. Built Bar is that amazing bar, protein bar, that tastes better than a candy bar. You can replace your candy bars with it. Now, taste better might be a stretch. Maybe let's say taste equal with candy bars, but it's better for you. It has less calories, less net carbs, and less sugar, on top of having 17 to 19 grams of protein. Now, I bought myself a pack of the variety pack just to get all these flavors tried out and tell you which ones are the best ones, in my opinion. And this week, it was Cherry Barcia, the perfect hint of chocolate mixed with that fruity goodness, out of this world. So if you like fruit and you like chocolate, you need to check out the Cherry Barcia at Built Bar. And now's the time to do it. You can use promo code LOCKED15 with your next order to save 15% off. Again, go to built.com and use LOCKED15 for 15% off your order at built.com. All right, so let's do it. Let's jump in and talk about the Big Ten West. Now, I've talked about this on the Locked On Golden Gophers podcast briefly in a smaller segment. I think we're disrespected. I think that we get too much flack and we don't get enough love. But I want to know what your feelings on this are, Ryan. What are you thinking? Do you think the Big Ten West gets hate on too much, or what do you think?
Yeah, so Kane, you and I have known each other for I don't know, a good week at this point.
Yep.
I've really never disagreed with you more on anything. I think the Big Ten West is adequately ranked, and I think the criticism that it gets is appropriate. I really do, and I hate saying that. I didn't used to think that, by the way. I've come onto this kind of the last couple of years. Here's the problem. I think it's a ceiling thing, and I think that's what people talk about, right? If you look in the Big Ten, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, perception or not, those three schools are it for the Big Ten in terms of what schools have the ceiling to potentially make a run. And if you even take it a step further, I see you're about to say something, but if you even take it a step further, Michigan State's the only other school in the Big Ten that's got to that playoff stage. They got whooped by Alabama, but the West has been shut out, and quite frankly, for the most part, they haven't gotten that close, right? And I think it's a ceiling thing. I think it's a quarterback thing, right? The Big Ten West has not produced quarterbacks at a level that allows it to compete at the highest level of football. Now, consistency top to bottom, the Big Ten West has done very well in an overall like win-loss type of record. But I think the context behind that is they play each other to some degree, and they beat up on maybe the dregs in other areas because they're solid football teams, but the ceiling isn't there. And I think that's where a lot of the criticism comes from.
All right, two things I have to jump on right away with that is, first off, outside of pro players, what has Penn State done that puts them up in that upper echelon in recent memory? I mean, besides churning out pros, which, yes, that's nice and lovely, but the program itself has struggled and probably been a little bit worse, in my opinion, than Wisconsin, than Iowa, and even Minnesota, if you're looking at just the last handful of years. So, I mean, I just can't get with it on Penn State. I think people just love them so much because they have Chris Godwin and Saquon Barkley and a bunch of flameouts too that we don't want.
And Gesicki and Hamler.
Right.
Yep, absolutely. But let me address that quick, and then just really quickly, I think it goes to ceiling. They have the ability, the facilities, and the financial backing to recruit at a certain level that allows them to. Listen, things have to come together, and I'm not a fan of James Franklin. I think he's a terrible in-game coach. But but they have a ceiling that I don't think any team in the West has, if that makes sense.
Okay. Well, and then my second thing for you. Now yes, we'll compare to the Big Ten East, but comparing it to the rest of the divisions across football, looking at the ACC, looking at the Pac-12, looking at even the middle tiered teams in the SEC, I personally don't like to jump into the SEC because you know what? Some of those fans are going to tune in and they're just going to chirp and chirp and chirp.
Yep.
And we don't got time for that.
Yep.
So, but the ACC, the Pac-12, the Big 12, how do are they also in that tier above to you? Or do you think that those guys are equal or worse than the Big Ten West?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the Pac-12 is generally pretty terrible outside of Oregon, right? But I would never put the Pac-12 above the Big Ten West. The ACC has been a one horse show for a decade, right?
Right.
Until maybe Miami gets back with Cristobal. But the Big Ten West can compete with all those schools. Outside of a Clemson, outside of an Oklahoma in the Big 12, right?
Right.
That's where the Big Ten West is strong, and I think that's where your point has a lot of validity. There's a lot of consistency and a lot of tough teams and a lot of winning football programs in the West, right? Iowa, obviously, Wisconsin, Minnesota the last couple of years, had an 11-win season. Again, though, I think it comes back to the ceiling is capped in the West, which makes it hard for people to give it a lot of praise. It's just very difficult to look at any team in the Big Ten West, in my opinion. And I hate this, right? But nobody looks at Wisconsin and says, realistically, that's a national championship caliber program because we can't figure out quarterback play like most teams in the West. So I think that's where a lot of the criticism comes from. And I haven't seen teams moving in a direction that really fixes that either.
I get that. My biggest thing is if you're looking at the winning percentage, I mean, let's take out those top tiers. So we're getting rid of Clemson, take them out of the ACC. We're getting rid of Oklahoma, take them out of the Big 12. I mean, you get rid of those top tier programs, Bama, Georgia, like those are the teams we're always seeing in the playoffs. So yes, if we're constantly comparing to that right now, the Big Ten West schools are not able to compare to those type of rosters. But you go and you look at UCLA, Texas, USC, UNC, Pitt, Miami, Wake Forest. I would take one of our three schools over all of those schools majority of times. And our winning percentage over the last 3 years has been better than every single one of those schools, just those top three schools. So then you take the next step and you look at Oregon, you look at Utah, you look at Baylor, you look at Oklahoma State. I think that we are right there with those type of programs. So I feel like, yes, if you're talking about the ceiling, you're talking about college football playoffs and can you win a national championship, then yes, I understand why there's hesitancy on giving the Big Ten West some legitimacy because we haven't even gotten to the playoffs really in any time recently. You know what I mean? But if you're looking at the overall caliber, I think we need to get more respect. I think we need more love. I mean, Wisconsin put up a heck of a fight against Oregon in the Rose Bowl, and many would say should have taken that game. I mean, Utah played against Ohio State, and they gave them a good run, but I mean, Ohio State won out. You've got Baylor, you've got Oklahoma State. Those teams are really good, and they're constantly getting talked up by the analysts out there. I feel like Wisconsin gets a lot of love. You guys get more love than us or Iowa over there.
Yeah,
but I feel like us and Iowa need more respect, which brings more legitimacy to the Big Ten West.
I agree with that. So I actually really like your last point there. A rising tide lifts all boats, right? So Iowa getting more hype, Minnesota getting more hype, Nebraska being good for once in a decade. A bowl team would help. So I think we're almost at a point where we're arguing floor and ceiling a little bit because I very much agree with you. I think the floor on these Big Ten teams, it's proven out, right? That they're a more consistent football division than a lot of the schools we've talked about, 100%. Texas will still be ranked higher than any Big Ten West team next year probably to start the season, right? And they're going to win 5 games. So I'd like 100% agree with you on that, right? 100%. The consistency in some of these programs and the style of football lends itself to that consistency in the Big Ten West. I just struggle at times, again, not to go back to it and beat the dead horse, but until more consistent quarterback play really starts to happen at these programs in the West, and that's obviously Wisconsin included, I struggled to say to really push back heavily on a lot of the criticism. Because really, what's the last great Big Ten West quarterback that we can think of? Like I was just before the show, I didn't do any research on this. Like, so I'm not trying to put you on the spot either, because
No, for sure.
I drew a blank. The last
I mean,
great
if
one.
I had to throw out a great one, I'm gonna have to go with your guy Russell Wilson over there.
And that's a decade ago.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think the quarterback play, I understand where you're going from. And I feel like we actually are kind of on the same page, though you came out hot saying you completely disagree.
I've only known you for a week. So
yeah,
we haven't had a chance to really agree or disagree on much. So it's a small sample size.
But no, I think we're kind of on the same page there. But I think getting to the playoffs, one of those three teams getting to the playoffs will bring more respect to our division. So that's got to be the next thing.
Yeah. And I would say this too. Wisconsin was close in 2017. They were close. They've had some shots. But
you know again, what they say, close is only good.
Yeah. Horseshoes and hand grenades. No, it's certainly true. Certainly true. All right, guys, coming up, we kind of hashed out where we thought the Big Ten West, the respect level. I actually think we can, like Kane said, I think we kind of came to a spot where we're generally in the same spot. We're going to talk a little bit coming up about BetOnline released some odds for the Big Ten West, the Big Ten in general, who's going to win the conference. And we really want to hash it out. If you had a little bit of money, a lot of bit of money, whatever you want to do, where would you put your money next year on the Big Ten, given the odds? And first, we also want to talk about today's show brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline is your number one source for all your sports betting news and information, and sports news in general, where the next coach is going to go, what's happening on the injury front. It is an easy-to-use website, a great place to go for all your knowledge and information. And it's a great time to do it. Baseball's ramping up. Now we have a good set of data to figure out where maybe you think the Braves are about to ramp back up now that Ronald Acuna is back. The Brewers have started out hot. Wherever you want to go with that, the NBA playoffs are happening. A great time if you're on that Milwaukee Bucks bandwagon after seeing Drew Holiday last night. Great time to put a few bucks down on that. So it's a great time to do this, guys. They have an easy-to-use website. Head over to BetOnline. Head over to BetOnline. Head to the website today. Use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and actions. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Kane, I want to bring you back in on this one. BetOnline released all the Big Ten odds for the conference championship. We both have them. I want to just say, if you had a sum of money, where would you put all your money next year, considering Ohio State is the far and away favorite, not going to give you much payout. Wisconsin is 10-1. Minnesota's 28-1. Is it going to be one of those three schools? Is there something else that stands out to you?
I mean, you're going to call me a homer, but if I am putting money on the line, I'm going with Minnesota, not because I'm like, oh yeah, we're going to win. But looking at those odds, man, the disrespect is
28-1 is real.
28-1. They have us just looking at the West alone, behind Wisconsin, behind Nebraska, behind Iowa, behind Purdue. We're fifth in the West. That is just unrealistic. If anything, I believe we're a top three contender in the West. And typically it'll be with Wisconsin and Iowa. But I just pulled up the schedules real quick. Iowa takes on Iowa State this year. Not an easy game. Michigan, Ohio State. On top of then you take on your Big Ten West rivals. So you come in with Purdue, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Nebraska to close the year. That's a difficult schedule. So then let's move over to Nebraska. Nebraska's got Oklahoma this year. They've got Michigan on the calendar. And then you've also got your Big Ten West schedule. I mean, these guys aren't playing schedules that are far and away easy. They've got some tough games. Whereas Minnesota doesn't see Ohio State this year. We don't see Michigan this year. And besides our rivalry games with Iowa and Wisconsin, the games that stand on our schedule is Michigan State and Penn State. Now, Michigan State kicks off the Big Ten play for us, so that's a major game. But even if you drop that game, then you're looking at Purdue. You're looking at kind of those easier, more cleanup games, so to speak, where we can start building up the momentum when we close with Iowa and Wisconsin. So I think that the disrespect is crazy on these odds. And so that's where I'd put my money, even if I wasn't being a homer.
Yeah, I listen, I think you make some good points. 28-1 is harsh. Like that those are steep odds for a team that over the last 4 years has really been one of the better teams in the Big Ten West. I would look again, I think if I had money and I had to actually put something, I'm just going to put it on Ohio State, and I'm just going to say my payout's going to be lessened, right? That's where realistically, if I'm living in my real life, if I have $100, $1,000, I'm just going to put it on Ohio State, right? If we take them out of it, I struggle. Like Wisconsin has the second best odds. I really struggle with it because not only do they have to go to Ohio State in week 4, which is a very obviously tough matchup, but the quarterback play hasn't been solved yet. So Iowa 20-1 is interesting to me. Iowa's typically really solid. Those are really good odds. Minnesota, I would never in my life put money on Minnesota because I couldn't bring myself to root for them. But the 28-1 is interesting. I would probably go Iowa if I really had to make a non-OSU decision, given the way that program typically plays. Their schedule, their crossovers are a little lighter this year. Nebraska's crossovers outside of Michigan are pretty light. But I don't know how you can trust Nebraska. That's where I want to go next with you.
Right.
Go ahead. ESPN, yeah, ESPN, the FPI, which is obviously a predictive model. It's not people doing it, but predicts the Nebraska to win the Big Ten West. The Nebraska's odds to win the conference are 14-1, higher than Iowa, Minnesota, markedly higher than Minnesota. At what point are people going to stop buying the Scott Frost hype train?
I don't know. Like I just don't get it. I mean, yes, we can be hyped about the coach, but doesn't the coach have to do something and put something on the field in order for you to really emphasize and say, yep, it's time to buy in? I mean, 3-9 last season. It's not like they were even 500 last year and they gave you all these flashes. And like you said, they have a kind of weaker schedule this year, but they still play Oklahoma. They still play Michigan. They still got us. They still got Wisconsin. They still got Iowa. So, I mean, that's 5 games right there. If you take 5 losses, you're not winning the Big Ten West. So I don't understand how they are putting them in the lead in so many instances and occasions. I need to see more before I would ever sniff that line.
Right. And I mean, the Oklahoma game wouldn't count as a conference loss, but you could still get beat up from it. Like Oklahoma's going to boat race them. I mean, probably. It's just interesting to me. They brought in a really good supposedly really good transfer quarterback in Casey Thompson from Texas. Adrian's gone. I always thought he was an anchor for that program, like a very flashy player, but he made losing plays all the time. But again, they won one conference game last year. Like they won one conference game last year. Like, stop it. They haven't been to a bowl game in 5 years.
The people that are putting all that money on Nebraska right now are the same people that put all that money on the Lakers in the NBA. You know what? You're buying into hype and not really into what you're seeing on the field or the court. So absolutely wild. Now, if you're looking at these odds, are there any teams in that bottom area that you would even think would sniff competitiveness, like Indiana, Illinois, Maryland, Northwestern, Rutgers? Are any of those even worth a shot to you?
The interesting one is, so that's a great question. So Rutgers is 200-1. I'm just looking at it now. Northwestern's 150-1. Maryland and Illinois are each 100-1. Let's immediately scratch off Rutgers and Maryland because they play in the East, right? Immediately. That's not happening.
For sure.
Let's scratch off Illinois because Brett Bielema is there. So that leaves Northwestern, and Northwestern playing in the West sneakily has this pattern. If you go back a while, with Nebraska or Northwestern's program, it's like 2 kind of mediocre years and 1 good year, a bad year and a good year. Like they really always have these bounce back seasons programmed into them. If you're going to lay $5, you could do way worse than Northwestern 150-1 in the West.
That's fair. And you know what? I mean, that's a great point. And they have a great coach. I mean, Fitzgerald is a great coach. And you know what? That's the perfect segue to kind of wrap this thing up is coaches. The Big Ten is full of great coaches. And the next crossover we do for all of you, hopefully you love this episode and you're ready to tune in for more. The next one is we are going to rank these Big Ten coaches. We might go to bat, we might go to war, or we might agree. We'll find out soon. That'll be the next crossover. But it's been great chatting with you, Ryan. I mean, I never expect to have a great chat with a Badgers fan, but this one will be maybe it's you're the exception. You can be the exception for Badgers
possibly.
Fans right
now, keep in mind it's off season and we haven't played any games yet. Like, wait until just let's pump the brakes on whether or not either of us are going to be exceptions. But no, I had a great time, Kane. Man, I really appreciated it.
All right, so that's going to do it for us here. It was great, and I can't wait till the next crossover. We'll have more news for you on ideas for the season and this rivalry, not only on the field, but between Locked On here at the Locked On Podcast Network. Have a great rest of the day, and make sure you tune in next week.
Thanks, guys.
And that's going to wrap it up for us here at the Locked On Golden Gophers. Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube. I've got another big crossover, not even a crossover, an interview coming up next week with a commit. And you know what? If you're listening and you got this far, then I'm going to let you know who that is. It's none other than 2023 commit to Golden Gophers, Zaquan Bryan. He's joining the show next week, and I can't wait for you guys to find out more about that commit. So be sure to follow the podcast wherever you get them and leave a 5-star review. This is Kane Rob, signing off.